So good morning, everyone. Did that scare you? You're like, oh man, I'm getting out of here. Concentration in statistics, I'm out of here right now. But it's actually very relevant. First of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I've had the opportunity to speak now to lots of different independent school groups, but let me say right now, I'm not an expert in your field at all. What I do know a fair bit about, though, is how to manage uncertainty. And as you can imagine, if you're in the business of managing uncertainty, business is good right now, very good. When it really comes to managing uncertainty, how do you be agile in your decision making, it really is about decision making. And so as you heard from my background, I am very quantitative by training. I'd love nothing more than to make every decision data driven. When I hear big data, yay, right? But the fact is, and you all know this, we can't rely only on the data. As much as we want to be data driven, we can't rely only on the data. We'll talk about that other piece of decision making in just a moment. Before we go further, though, you heard a little bit about my academic background. My professional background, I did teach at the Wharton School. That's the business school there at the University of Pennsylvania for many years. I taught in the MBA program. I did start my own firm about 8 years ago. I still spend some time at Wharton, but I spend 90% of my time working with mid-level and senior level executives really across industries and around the world. And I tell you that because this morning, in our little short 55 minutes now, I'll give you some empirical data. I'll reference empirical data, but I'll also give you my anecdotal evidence, meaning my experiences. And it may or may not come from your world. But you know what I found? There is so much commonality when it comes to thinking about how you make good strategic decisions. When I work with an organization in a deep way, I often hear this: oh, Kathy, we are very unique. We have challenges you've never seen before. And while that's true, there's just a lot in common. Here's a snapshot of my life. This is why it's fun to be Kathy Pearson. Literally, this time last year, literally this week, I was in Shanghai, China, with a bunch of Singaporean healthcare leaders from the Ministry of Health in Singapore, doing this immersion session. It was fascinating. Got on a plane that Friday night, flew back to Philadelphia, where I live, and on Monday morning, I spent the entire day at Wharton with a client I do a ton of work with, Estee Lauder. You guys know Estee Lauder? Right? By the way, is it so intimidating working with Estee Lauder? I'm with them next Monday, and I'm already thinking I got to get my nails done. What am I going to wear? Because every time I get in front of them, I'll be with like 70 of them, and I know they're all going to think the whole time, if I could get a hold of her, because they all come in, looking like this, and I'm like, hey, I'm Kathy. But anyway, that's my own anxiety. Got on a plane that night, and by the way, they're always giving me anti-aging cream. I don't know what that's about, but anyway, got on a plane that night, flew to, I can't remember what city it was, but I gave a keynote speech to about 400 people that were risk managers from banks. By the end of the week, I was facilitating an executive leadership board retreat with a food ingredient company. You can't get any different from that. And yet, you know what? We were having the same conversations. How do you make good decisions? And so, just to kind of start the conversation, I hear a lot, and this is from your colleagues, from people from all sorts of industries, that it seems like it's so much harder in today's environment to make a good strategic decision. That something about it makes it harder than it was, say, 30 years ago. Why do you think people say that? Just shout it out. Too much information. That is the number one challenge I hear. There's too much information. What else? Pardon? It's a very complex world externally, and our organizations are becoming more complex. What else? Yeah, it seems like that whole transparency thing, that's really sounds good in theory, doesn't it? And it seems like change is happening so much more quickly. If it takes you too long to make a decision, that first set of information you receive is probably not going to be relevant anymore, right? Anything else that you all see?
Higher turnover in the decision making.
So that's a great one, actually, and I'm starting to hear that more and more. That, in fact, somebody new comes along and wants his or her own stamp on things, and so now we have a whole new process. I'm sure that doesn't happen at your organizations, but just kind of try to pretend. Let me give you a list of what I hear. Not what I think, but what I hear. The first one, by far and away, too much information. And I just want to give you a quick sort of frame of reference. Rule of thumb. Actually, originally from the U.S. military. It's called the 40-70 rule. Has anyone heard of this? 40, 70. By the way, that's not supposed to add up to 100 if you're worried about my math skills from Auburn. If there are any Alabama fans, I don't want to hear it. So here's a rule. If you have a complex decision to make and you don't get at least 40% of the information, you'll make an uninformed decision. Now, how do I know when I get to 40%? I don't even know what the denominator is, right? It's not about the absolute value, it's about the spirit of this, which says we shouldn't rely only on our intuition. I think we'd all agree with that. I do think, by the way, intuition has a place, but we certainly don't want to base our decision entirely on intuition. But you know where I see the problem? It's the 70%. And the military says you try to get more than 70% of the information, you will become paralyzed. Your enemies, your competitors will completely defeat you. Now, I don't know if the number's 70 or 75 or 80%. That's not the point. The point is that people like me, and maybe some of you, we're dangerous. I want 99% of the data. It bothers me to make a decision if I think there's more data out there. And when I work with analytically driven organizations, I often hear people say, I feel like our senior leaders won't make a decision. We have to have a better business case. Give me more data. But there are two reasons why we can't get all the data. Number one is the time and volume thing. But here's the second reason, and it really is germane to what we're talking about today. So a couple of years ago, I was in Paris with the OECD. Do you know the OECD? It's a big economic development group. It's multinational. And I was spending about 3 days facilitating some strategic conversations. They had to make some strategic decisions. And I don't know if you've been following that whole thing that's been going on in Brexit, you know, in the UK and all that business. Well, at this time, Theresa May was prime minister. She's so yesterday, but this is back then. And she had just called for a second election. She wanted to shore up support. It didn't work out so well for her, right? She won, but you know, it didn't really work out the way she had planned. So here I am with this economic development group, the OECD, trying to talk strategy. And they kept saying, Kathy, it's chaos in the UK. How can we make any strategic decisions? We don't have any idea what's going to happen. And I said, that's right. You know what? We could collect every bit of data that exists today, May, whatever it was. We still would not know the answer to the question, will there be a euro in 5 years? You know why? Because it's an uncertainty. And no amount of data collection is going to answer that for us. I know this sounds simplistic, but the best decision makers with which I've ever worked are the ones that say, I need to make a decision when I don't have all the information, when I still have uncertainties. Now, here's the dirty little secret on that. That means I cannot guarantee a good outcome. This is what scares people, right? I cannot guarantee a good outcome if I'm making a decision under uncertainty. My argument today is we can raise the probability of a good decision by adopting certain behaviors. Can't guarantee it, but we can sure raise the probability. That's my argument. Okay, the second thing I hear is that change happens so much more quickly. You all mentioned that. We have to make these decisions much more quickly. And just a funny story about that. So I remember when it was July of 2016, okay? I'm in San Francisco for 3 days with a group of deans of nursing schools, okay? These are deans of schools of nursing, 120 people. What do you think that demographic looked like? Deans of nursing schools. 90% women in their late 50s and 60s, okay? These were my people, just a big group of people just like me, okay? So I said to them on the first day, I said, how many of you know what Pokemon Go is? You guys know what Pokemon Go is? Now, the reason I asked that question was because Pokemon Go had just been released 12 days prior. Not 12 weeks, not 12 months, 12 days. So I figure a bunch of women in their 50s and 60s are not going to know what Pokemon Go is. I am going to look so cool, right? So I get up there. How many of you know what Pokemon Go is? They all knew what Pokemon Go was. Oh, yeah, I've got it on my phone. You got a Pokemon behind you. Like the whole thing. And I said, what does Pokemon Go have to do with healthcare? And we laughed. That night, I'm not kidding you, I'm sitting in the hotel, reading the headlines from the newspaper on my computer. What do I see? University of Michigan Children's Hospital using Pokemon Go to motivate patients out of the bed. 12 days. I took a screenshot of it, and the next morning when everybody came in, it was up on the screen. They thought I was like a futurist or something. Like, oh, so smart, right? Pokemon Go's not going to change healthcare, but that augmented reality, I don't know if you've been reading about it, it's changing how healthcare is being delivered. It's a big deal, right? So because of what I do, I know all the corporate buzzwords: resilience, agility, customer centricity, think global, act local, collaboration, innovation. And here's another one: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. Does anybody know the buzzword? VUCA. Basically means we don't know what's going to happen and we don't even know what to look for. Globalization. Even if we're a regional player, we care what happens in the other parts of the world. We're all tied together economically. This one's interesting, though. Competition. And this is germane to you all as well. Even though many of you, if not all, are nonprofit. We've always had competitive markets. What's different about competition today than, say, 20, 30 years ago? Where's the competition coming from? All over. Non-traditional competitors. In business school, we call this lower barriers to entry. People in our space we never dream were in our space. If you had told me 6 years ago I'd be getting into an unmarked car with some guy I didn't know who had my credit card information, I'd say, you're cuckoo. That sounds crazy, doesn't it? But get this. This is an interesting one, and I don't know if it really applies to lots of places, but I do some work with a pharma company that has lots of different business units, okay? So they have silos, in case you have those. And each of these business units looks after a different therapeutic area. So one of the therapeutic areas is eye care, contact lenses. They make contact lenses, corrective lenses. I'm wearing their product in my eyeball right now. Who has become a potential competitor that they never dreamed 20 years ago? Any guesses? Competitor for, they've known about LASIK for a while. It's a company. Starts with a G. Google. If I ask any question, just say Google, and you'll be right. It's Google. Google's not getting into the corrective lens business, but they are doing some experiments with contact lenses. Some of you may have read about this. They actually have invented a contact lens that has little sensors on it that can read your blood sugar level real-time, 24/7, non-invasively. I don't know if they're going to go to market with it, but potentially if you're a diabetic, you'll be able to monitor your blood sugar level non-invasively. Here's the interesting part of this story. This pharma company, guess what one of its areas, other business units looks after, therapeutic area? Diabetes. I was talking to one of their senior folks in the last year, and he's like, gosh, darn it, I cannot believe this. Here we are, have deep expertise in diabetes. We have deep expertise in eye care, and it takes a tech company to come up with a solution for the patient. But he said, I bet you'll never believe this, but those people over in eye care, they never talk to the people in diabetes. This is the challenge when we have silos, and every organization has silos, don't they? At one point in my career, I was with a boutique management consulting firm. We had 25 people. We had silos. How do you have silos with 25 people? I was practically in a silo by myself. It was weird. Dangerous. I do a lot of work in healthcare, and I do a lot of work in financial services, and those two industries have something unique in common, and that is regulations. So this may be a biased sample. But this one I want to spend a little bit of time on fear. I can't tell you how many times I hear people say, I feel like our leaders are afraid to make a decision. Why would they be afraid? Just make a stinking decision. Why would they be afraid? What if I make the wrong one, right? So Palmer, since you introduced me, I'm going to pick on you, but we'll do all together. He's not very happy. Suppose I say to Palmer, we can all play together. I'll give you a choice of 2 games to play, okay? You can play game 1. Now in game 1, I flip a coin. If it's heads, I'll give you $5,000. Tails, I'll give you nothing. Or you can play game 2. Game 2, I flip a coin. If it's heads, I give you $10,000. Tails, I give you nothing. So you get the 2 games? It's either $5,000 or nothing or $10,000 or nothing. There's no trick to this, by the way. Don't you wish your decisions were this easy? What's a natural choice Palmer ought to make? Game 2, $10,000. In fact, if Palmer worked for me and said anything but game 2, I would say, I don't think this job's for you. We're going to find you a new one. Clearly, that's the right decision. Suppose both games occur. Game 1 occurs, all those poor decision makers that said game 1. Guess what? It's heads. They get $5,000. I'm sure you know what happens to Palmer. Game 2 occurs, and it's tails, and he gets nothing. If he works for me, what do I say to him? Thanks for your service. Here's the door. Now, I know maybe it's not a financial number, but think about any kind of decision, a metric. Do you reward only on the outcomes, or do you also reward on good decision behavior? Because he made the right decision, correct? And in fact, if he had that same decision to make, those of you who are mathematically inclined know that his best long-term average, the highest expected value he can get, he says game 2 every time. He recognizes half the time he gets 0, but half the time he gets $10,000. But here's what happens in real life. I slap his hand. I penalize him. I can't believe you said game 2. Our competitors have higher enrollment. Our competitors have more donor dollars. What's he going to do next time he has a similar decision? What's he going to do? Game 1, or even worse, I'm not playing. This behavior happens every single day in organizations around the world, I'm telling you. Oh, they don't say we become risk averse. In fact, I hear this all the time from senior leaders. I want my people to be more risk-taking. I want them to have a higher tolerance for failure. We learn more from failures than successes. Fail fast, fail cheap, fail early, fail often. I've heard it all. And yet I've never seen that language change behavior. Unless you're like in an innovation incubator, or if you're, in R&D, it just doesn't change behavior. Why? Well, number one, we don't reward for failure, do we? And anyway, in the English language, at least, failure has a negative connotation. I personally don't want to be known as excelling at failing. Here comes Kathy. Let's see what she failed at today. No. And I got to tell you, the things I've heard, and you guys are teaching the kids this, aren't you? Hey, this is how you learn. And yet that word failure, especially in a corporate environment or any sort of organizational environment, I find it's very, very tough. Now, a lot of organizations are trying to get around this. I have a client, this is pretty funny. About a year ago, they were telling me, we want to really promote failures in this organization. We want to celebrate failures. So we have instituted Failure Fridays. That's what we got. And every Friday, we're going to feature someone who failed that week. And I'm thinking, I don't want to be featured on Failure Fridays. At least not more than once. Right? Well-intentioned. Hard to do. So I have a chance. I'm very blessed. I get to work with nonprofit organizations, for-profit organizations, government agencies. Everybody wants good outcomes. So if we think about outcomes on a continuum, first of all, does anybody in here know who Annie Duke is? Anybody ever heard of Annie Duke? Who is she? She's a professional poker player. Actually was this close to finishing her doctorate at the University of Pennsylvania, where I taught for many years. And then she said, I think I can make more money as a poker player, and she has. So that's good for her. She just wrote a book called Thinking in Bets. But she talks about when she has a poker hand, the outcome of her poker hand is based on two things. The cards she's dealt, and her opponents, and the way she plays them. So if we think of that in terms of any decision we make, really the outcome is based on two things. Our skill, and she calls it luck. I have a colleague at Wharton that studies the role of chance in decision making. I'm going to call it uncertainty. Some organizations call it risk. Basically, what we cannot control. So if you believe, by the way, if you go into the casino and you play the slot machines, where does that lie on the outcomes? Where does that lie? Complete luck. No matter how much you think your lucky underwear is helping you, it's not. Okay? So if we want to raise the probability of a good outcome, there are two things we can do. We can build our decision-making, implementation, leadership skills, and we can learn to manage uncertainty better. And it's that second one that I want to talk about.